Great. I'm the last speaker before lunchtime, so I'm going to be quick, okay? I won't need the 5-minute call. It'll be the as the sound of the rumbling tummies gets louder, I'll know it's time to move off. In a way, I feel like this is almost redundant because I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. We know as lone parents how much being a parent on your own and raising your children on your own impacts on mental health. However, earlier this year, we spoke to our members, we being SPARK. 168 people responded and spoke about what impacted on their excuse me, I can't read, whether or not their mental health had deteriorated since they became a lone parent. Now, you can see from that almost 50% said that their mental health had significantly deteriorated since they became lone parents. And for the majority of people who spoke more about that, they said that the biggest factor was actually poverty. That suddenly going from a 2-income household to a 1-income household, even when they and it was usually mothers, so forgive me if I do gender stereotype and speak about she and mothers, I am aware that a number of our members are male as well, but predominantly we're women. Even if our members had been in situations where there was financial abuse, the family unit was still worse off once they became a lone parent family. Some people said that their mental health had improved. That took me a little bit by surprise, but then I thought about it and people explained that by saying actually not having to deal with an abusive spouse or somebody who treated them unequally meant that their mental health improved, and often these were women who were working outside of the home, so that they still had the self-esteem that a job brings, they still had the income that a job brings, and they found that their mental health actually improved because they were able to, as one woman said, she said, finally, after 12 years, I am myself again. So moving on from that, I won't dwell on things because I know that we're... Now, these are some of the things that our parents have said to us when they were expanding on the difficulties that being a lone parent brings. These are direct quotes. That parents find themselves saying to their children, we don't want to lie to our children, but we can't actually turn around and say to them, actually, yes, we're terribly poor. Actually, that refrain of "did you turn the immersion off?" It's not a joke in our families. It can be the difference between actually having enough to pay to pay the ESB bill and having enough bus fare to get your children to and from school, which other people have spoken about earlier today. Now, which of these most impacts on your mental health? As you can see, the largest response was 26%, and people were citing poverty. Now, I'd actually nearly say that poverty affects, or certainly impacts on, nearly every other one of those themes, those factors there, which are being single, funny enough, was the thing that bothered us most and impacted least on our mental health. However, it is a factor because it's not just everybody thinks, oh, you're not in a romantic or a sexual relationship. It's actually having another adult around who is as emotionally invested in your children as you are. That is quite significant for people. And it's also the ability to have somebody else ask, how was your day? And being able to share that information with somebody else, and actually even the impact of having somebody else accommodate you in their lives is huge, and makes a difference to people when they suddenly find themselves single. Social exclusion and isolation are linked, but they're not the same thing. We found that social exclusion referred more to not actually being invited to places, because you'd kind of be the spare person. I remember specifically being told that as a single woman, as I was then and am now, I wasn't really going to be invited to dinner parties because other women might be afraid I'd be after their husbands. I'm like, hello, I've had enough of my own, I really don't want yours. You can keep them. Having to make all the decisions, you know, bearing all the responsibility for the children impacts on our mental health as well, because it's not just the logistics, although they are huge and they are a part of what we have to do. It is getting them up every morning, making sure that they have their breakfast before they go to school, making sure they're on the bus, making sure that they have the bike, and if the bike is, if they cycle to school, that the wheels are good and the brakes are good and all of that sort of thing, that when you are a lone parent, you have to do all of that thinking. There is nobody else. There's nobody else to take the bins out, but that's the least of your worries. There's nobody else to care. And if you have more than one child, which most of our members do, if you have a child who's sick, and you have another 2 or 3 who need to go to school, and often our children don't go to the same schools, and that's not by choice, it's because of how the Catholic Church has segregated education. Anyway, I won't talk about that now. So you do have more than one school run to make on your school run, and that impacts on your mental health. We are constantly juggling and project managing and trying to figure out the best way to make the best life for everybody under our roof. If we're lucky enough to have a roof of our own, let's just say that one, that it absolutely takes a toll on your mental health. I remember Louise Bayliss, actually, the first time I met her, saying that, you know, that we talk about how important children are in Irish society. We talk about how, you know, if you're pregnant, well, off you go then, you're going to have a baby. That's pretty much going to be the outcome of that one. And then when you're in the maternity hospital, in one hand we hand you your baby, and in the other we hand you 20 years of poverty if you are a lone parent. And that's pretty much how it is, unfortunately. The other thing is, of course, that bearing responsibility for all the children means that you've got all what we're now calling the emotional labour. And all of the things like, if they're going to a birthday party, you've got to figure out how you're going to get them there, what gift you're going to actually be able to afford for the other child without looking stingy, because you don't want your child to be the one who's bringing something they got free in the cornflakes box. It needs to be something that's similar in monetary value to what's being brought by the other children. And the isolation then coming, which I've linked to social exclusion, means that you actually just can't afford to accept invitations. If somebody says, would you like to come for coffee? Jesus, yes, I'd love to, but I can't. And you get fairly fed up fairly quickly of being the one who's being, I'll shout you a coffee, it's all right, I'll get it this time. No, we don't actually want pity. We want to be able to partake in society on an equal and equitable level with other people. And even if in our own heads we don't have the language to put on this, this is what we're feeling and this is what is affecting us. And this is what, unfortunately, has become life for single parents in Ireland at the moment. Looking again just at poverty and how it impacts them, and the fact that it is the single biggest influence on our mental ill health. This is a stark reminder of what consistent poverty actually is, which the source obviously is the European Anti-Poverty Network. Most of our members would report at least 3 of these indicators applying to them constantly. Now, as Professor Layte was saying earlier, you can't be stressed and be a happy, jolly parent. You can't be stressed and be fully engaged with your children. And the fact that you know you're not fully engaged with your children leads to guilt, which leads to depression, which leads to an overwhelming sense of failure that we have as parents. We feel that we are failing, but we're not failing. The society that we are living in that does not support us to be the best parents that we can be is what is failing. We are doing our best and still being penalised. So then we had a look. This was a second survey that we took in September. 110 of our members responded. And we had a look at what people have actually done and how they've managed to get help for their mental health, difficulties. We had 108 of 110 respondents went for counselling when they could. We are very much aware that counselling is not a low-cost option in Ireland. Free counselling is not a low-cost, is unavailable. The best you can hope for if you're a medical card holder, which most of our members are, or many of our members are, is 6 crisis sessions Now, I don't know anybody in this room, or actually anybody anywhere, who can get over a crisis in 6 sessions. Let's face it, by number 4 or number 5 of your 6 sessions, you're only starting to trust your therapist, you're only starting to trust your counsellor, you're only starting to go under the skin of what the problem actually is. So 6 sessions, it's not even a sop, it's actually an insult. So people who could afford to go for counselling went for counselling. After that, an overwhelming majority of our respondents, that's 98 out of 110, were on medication. Not necessarily by choice, but because it was all that was offered. And it was a question of, I will take any help I can get. Now, the majority of those, 72% of those 98, were on antidepressants, followed closely by anti-anxiety tablets and sleeping tablets. Now, I hasten to add that not everybody who responded was on all 3. But some people were. And it just speaks to the crisis and the mental health difficulties and the mental health crisis that affects lone parents significantly more than parents who are coupled. After that, we had people, 85 out of 110 of our respondents had used alternative methods. I don't necessarily mean going down and sitting in a cave and banging a drum, although if that's what they wanted to do, off they go. But alternative help like yoga, meditation, talking to a friend was cited by a lot of people, because I suppose it comes in, it's kind of poor man's counselling, isn't it? Although then your poor friend has nowhere to go if, once they've taken on your problems as well. Also things like massage. Some people, some of our members are trained massage therapists, and they would swap with other friends, free massage for free massage, because that would help with relieve their stress. And 13 of our 110 members were hospitalised now with mental health difficulties. I count myself as one of those 13, and I will also share, and I'm not alone in this, that there were times when I probably should have been in hospital for my own health and safety and for that of my children, but as a lone parent, I had nobody to mind my children if I went into hospital. So I stayed out of hospital, my mental health got worse, and I know for a fact that it had a negative impact on the mental health of my children, because even though that's not what I'm speaking about this morning, it's an obvious, it's almost what we'd call in the vernacular a no-brainer. If my mental health as a parent isn't particularly in good shape, you can be darn sure that the mental health of my children is not going to be in good shape, not least because as children of lone parents, our children try and protect us from their reality. They will try and solve their problems themselves. They will not let us know that they need money for a school outing. They just won't go. They'll pretend to be sick that day. We won't even get the note. We won't even know what's going on sometimes. And also, as children of lone parents, our children really feel that they've got to protect us from their difficulties because we have enough of our own. Even if we don't say that to them, our children aren't thick. There's a huge difference between a mental health difficulty and stupidity, and sometimes people don't realise that. But the fact that we have mental health difficulties and that our children have mental health difficulties as a result of that doesn't mean that they are unaware of the fact that we are not doing so well. Now, we also found that some people just got on with it. Instead of actually being able to go and get help with treatment for their mental health difficulties, they just got on with it. The majority, almost 50% of respondents, felt that there just isn't enough help immediately available when you feel that you're on the brink of becoming unwell. And I mean on the brink of becoming depressed, or that the stress is too much and you need help now. The interventions aren't there. You could be waiting 6 months to get an appointment, to go on a waiting list. And that's before we talk about CAMS, which I'm not going to do this morning because it's nearly dinner time. 42% of people just didn't seek help. They knew it wasn't there, so they didn't even bother going looking for it. Or sometimes people felt that it was only in retrospect they realised how bad their mental health had been, and that perhaps they should have looked for help. But because lone parents tend to be quite stoic and tend to just get on with things, they didn't even see the problems until they had come out the other side themselves and thought, okay, the next time I feel like that, I've got to do something before it gets so bad. And of course, we had the 12% of Irish mammies who just got on with it. Now, solution-focused. I'm going to leave you with this. We spoke to people and said, well, what would make a difference to your mental health? We understand that it's being negatively impacted by the fact that you're a lone parent. We understand that that's having a negative impact on your children. What would help? This is what we came up with. Clear pathways to or back to education and employment. We're caught in the poverty trap that is not of our own making. If you want to go back to work, you're losing your benefits. And it's not even the amount of social welfare that comes into your bank account. It's the supplementary welfare, like the medical cards, like help with your rent. We need to factor all of these things in, and very often, lone parents find that they are better off staying out of employment. Getting back to education, education, I absolutely agree that it is the way forward. Education is so much more than what you learn at university. It's the self-esteem, it's the critical thinking, it's the ability to critically analyze the choices you're being presented with so that you can make the best one for you and your family at that time. So exclusion from education really has a negative impact on us as lone parents, and of course filters down to the next generation, because if you can't see it, you can't be it. We're looking for parity of esteem with partnered parents, a valuing of the work that we do. It sounds very simple, but we don't have it. The idea that parents who work within the home, that their contribution to society is at least as valuable as parents who work outside of the home. Well, it is. We need access to counselling with professionals who are trained to deal with and to understand the special needs of lone parents. It's not just, oh dear, we're a bit poor and we don't have money for coffee. It's a little bit more than that. In fact, it's a lot more than that. It's looking at the self-esteem of lone parents, and often we blame ourselves, and also society has a handy knack of blaming us for the fact that our marriages and our relationships break down. Nobody goes into a relationship thinking, sure, this will only last a little while, and maybe by the time I have 3 kids, it doesn't matter anymore. Like, any of us who has a child goes into that, into the relationship and into having a child, thinking that even if we're not still in the relationship, as a romantic relationship, that the other parent will at least step up and co-parent. Most of us, unfortunately, find out that that is not the reality. Particularly if you have a child who has any sort of a special need, often we find the other parent is very, very quick to run the other direction. Enforced maintenance from the non-custodial parent. Now, Louise is going to speak about this later, but it is hugely important. We are one of the few countries in the Western society that doesn't have a maintenance recovery unit, where if women are not, and again, it usually is women who are due maintenance for the children. If it isn't paid in, even if it's court ordered, you've got to go back to court, you've got to chase, you've got to beg and plead with social welfare to stop taking the amount that you should be getting out of your social welfare so that you can actually feed the children, because that's kind of nice. Less precarious housing arrangements. Well, I don't really think, after Tracy's presentation, I need to say any more about that. But it's not just for parents who have children with special needs. It's for all lone parents. If you are living in a home and you don't know if you'll be there in 6 months' time, it's not a home. It's a roof over your head, which is a very different thing. A home is stability. It's a place where your children know that they can come in the front door and close it behind them, and everybody else stays out because it's yours. I spoke to a lone parent 2 weeks ago who had, in 26 months, had moved house 3 times because the woman who owned the house died, so it had to go to probate, so they had to get out. Somebody else like that, the roof was leaking, it needed to be renovated, you had to get out. There is no consistency, and gosh, if as parents is one thing we know our children need consistency. Flexibility in the workplace. Now, this is very interesting because employers seem to think that once we start caring for children, we forget everything that we knew and our skills stagnate. What they don't realise is that we actually enhance our skills and find skills and abilities that we never knew we had. Project managing, financial management, counselling, driving, all of these things that we do, multitasking, even though that's really not supposed to be a thing anymore, yeah, we still do it, because we have to. The ability to think on your feet, the ability to come up with answers immediately, the ability to be creatively solution-focused. Yeah, do you know what? Knock it into a cocked hat. Everybody in this room can do that so well, because we have to. But employers forget that. They think that because you're not doing it outside of the home and earning money for it, unless you're being an economic unit doing that, it doesn't exist. So we need the flexibility around understanding that our skills have been enhanced, actually, by raising our children, but also the awareness that whether we're on site in your office or at home in our bed in our pajamas at the laptop, we can still do the job just as well, unless you need a receptionist, in which case in the pajamas might not be the look you're going for. But a lot of jobs really can be done off-site or with an amount of flexibility where I need to go and take my child to an appointment right now. I will be back and I will work until 6 o'clock. I'll make up the hour. You'll get your money's worth. You'll get your pound of flesh. The other thing that employers don't seem to realise is that we need the job more than the next person. We will work harder. We will do a better job. We will be just as flexible as you are, because it means more to us. And finally, fair childcare schemes. What that means is not just accessible childcare before and after school. It also means that if parents choose to care for their children in their own homes, they should be supported in that. Because what's better for our mental health is better for our children's mental health. And yay over Adker, no matter how early we get up in the morning, it doesn't seem to be good enough for you. But what's good for us and good for our children is good for society as a whole. If you actually want to look at improvements and how to bring Ireland into the 21st century, talk to the single parents, because we have a lot of ideas. Now it's lunchtime. Thanks.